Welcome to the Counterweight podcast. I am Doug Rogers, Chief Revenue Officer and Managing Partner for Waypoint Healthcare Solutions. And I'm joined weekly by my co-host, James Canary, founder and owner of the Upper Right Corner. Together, we are focused on speaking to and learning from growth leaders across the healthcare space about their journeys and lessons learned. We believe that a majority of people join healthcare companies, technology companies, providers, healthcare systems, because they believe in the mission of improving lives of those around them. Growth leaders carry a unique responsibility for their companies, which is to deliver growth. This most often takes the form of revenue, but can also represent new client acquisitions or new member or patient acquisitions. This tension between the mission of the organization and the need to continually grow margin can be healthy, but at times it can also be challenging. James and I want to explore how growth leaders manage this tension, not only for their teams, but also with their leaders and in many cases, board members and investors. We will discuss with our guests the career journey they have been on, key influences that help them put them into the position they are today. We will talk about successes and challenges, what they learned from these events for themselves and for their teams. We will also discuss what tips and tricks these leaders use to help keep them positioned for success, as well as how they balance the tension between mission and margin. Join us each week for a new episode with our guest. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, Instagram, and LinkedIn under the name The Counterweight Podcast. Subscribe, like, follow, and give us feedback as we go along. Now on to the show. Welcome to the Counterweight Podcast. Super excited for today's session. I'm here with James Canary, my co-host, and Grant. We couldn't be more pumped to have you on the show. Why don't we just take a second, tell us a little bit about yourself, what you're doing these days, etc., and then we'll dive right into it.
Yeah. Well, hey guys, thanks for having me. Good to see you guys. Grant Johnson. I get the privilege of serving as the Chief Revenue Officer for a healthcare IT company based in Kansas City. Company's called Illuminate, and we largely are trying to help our clients identify data within the record and drive better value out of that through patient follow-up and patient experiences.
Fantastic.
Right on.
Yeah, I hear Chief Revenue Officer is a pretty important job. Yeah.
It definitely comes with a little bit of pressure to perform at times, for sure.
Yeah, it's probably
Awesome.
the officer in the role that gives all the pressure.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, that's right.
That's right.
So I have to ask, James and I were talking about this earlier. I'm just curious, when we came to you and said, hey, we're starting a podcast, what was your first reaction? The thing that went through your head when you heard that from us?
Well, first of all, probably not two better guys to actually co-host a podcast. That's my first thought. And I mean, genuinely, being able to talk in a forum like this about the topic that you guys are kind of digging into is an area that I think is incredibly interesting. I mean, even for myself as a learner, but being able to contribute feedback and experiences in this type of venue is a really cool opportunity. So I appreciate you guys doing it. Thanks for having me on it.
Wow, Grant, your reaction was way more positive than mine. When Doug and I first talked about this, my reaction was, another podcast? Really? So way to go, Grant.
It's interesting, James. I am probably one of the more addictive folks to listening to these for different reasons, right? You learn so much from experiences, and I like to be an avid reader. Audiobook helps that even further these days, but you learn from experiences, and when you get a chance to listen to peers talk about theirs, I actually find podcasts almost more helpful than reading or audiobooks in terms of relevant experiences these days. So I'm actually encouraged by it, and there's not a lot out there talking about this topic and the topic of how are we focusing on growth of high performing sales organizations and individuals.
Game on, dude.
Game on. That's exactly right. I will preface, I don't want to be shy about this. I think James and I fully believe that in 2 years, this is going to be a next Netflix show.
I think
Ah,
that's what we're gearing towards.
100%. Yeah.
And with guests like you, I don't see why
I mean,
that's not gonna
we're
happen.
going after the Kelsey brothers, let's be honest.
Yes, that's
We're going to
right.
take down new heights.
that's
So,
Um,
here
that.
we go.
You know what, guys? If anybody can do it, you guys at least would be able to give it a solid run.
yeah. Well, we've got our fingers crossed. I do want to touch on, to your point, Grant. What are we focused on?
Mhm.
As we've been talking, one of the things that I think we feel very strongly about is that there is a ton of value in learning and hearing from people who have been on the journey. And we've talked about this, James and I have talked about this. We've all had experiences in our career. And so the chance to actually see someone who's done that, hear what they've tackled, both the good and the bad, I think is incredibly valuable. And I think we also believe that there's a unique dynamic here within the Midwest, a flavor, if you will, not to portend to a barbecue question, but a flavor, if you will, in terms of these experiences that may be different, neither good nor bad, than other people's experiences that I don't think we hear enough of. So I'm really excited to explore that. I'm also excited that we're going to explore this tension. We're going to use the phrase mission and margin as we go through the conversation, but I think
Mm.
that's also something that I think people shy away from, especially when they're in a role like yours. They shy away from the pressure, and are the concern about how you balance mission and margin. So I'm really pumped that we're gonna dive into these topics. But let's get started with probably the easiest question. We're gonna throw it right over the plate. You're gonna knock it out of the park. How did you get started into sales?
Oh, great question. So I started in healthcare IT sales at the same company I started my post-collegiate work at, which was a
Oh,
company known as Cerner. I
How do you
never heard
spell
started.
of.
that, Grant? Can you spell that for us?
It is with a C.
Good to
Despite
know.
many popular beliefs, it is with a C. But I started actually as a post-grad hire and started in a consulting organization, which was a fantastic experience. Gave me a lot of exposure, I would say, to what the Cerner customers do from an industry perspective, from a process perspective. And then I actually had a client recommend that I get into sales. And the client
Really?
said, I have never seen such a young person with so much passion about what you're doing. You should really be in sales. Now, I will admit, when I was younger, that there was a popular belief that I would either be in sales or politics. So apparently, those two things are relatively closely linked. I don't think I would make a great politician, so I decided sales is probably the best path.
Well, I think we're going to explore the political angle in a separate podcast.
Fair enough.
But I'm curious, was that a surprise to you, or did you harbor aspirations to be in a sales role from the very beginning, or was that quite the change in terms of how you thought about where your career was going to take you?
Um, I'll answer that by stepping just one step further back.
Yeah.
So when I was in college, I was like, unlike probably too many fellow collegiate folks who didn't know exactly what they were going to do post school. I think I finished with one major and about seven minors, since that major changed so many times. But I had actually committed myself to go to law school after school.
Oh, really?
I did. And I had chosen to go to law school in Washington, D.C. That's where I was going to go. I had all but I had even in fact identified a place to live and everything. So
Wow.
I was on my way to law school, and I had an advisor that said, you're relatively extroverted. You're going to be spending 3 years in a library. You might want to take advantage of what they call their deferral program. And their deferral program was an admission that allows you to come back basically within 2 year window. He said you get a little bit of money and get a little bit of work experience and you apply that to law school. And I thought, you know what? That's why they have advisors. That's exactly what I'm going to do. And needless to say, I did not go back to law school. As I got into as I got into the workforce, I, I just gravitate toward people. And any
Yeah.
opportunity to spend time with people is what I love. And there is just that obvious natural connection between what you do in sales and constant communication and engagement with customers. So I think it was a natural gravitation, but I definitely took a little while to get there.
Yeah.
That-
Well, and I suspect you didn't major like in college, you didn't choose a major for chief revenue officer. Was that available at your
You
school?
know, it was not, James. I don't even know. It'd be a great question to see what the track that they recommend if you want to go into sales or be a chief revenue officer, what they recommend the curricula is even these
Yeah.
days. But no, it was not.
So walk us through just kind of those major milestones in your career that kind of got you to where you are now. So you obviously started out as kind of entry level and into the sales training program at Cerner after doing consulting or implementations. Kind of what were those next steps, and how did you end up going from individual contributor to management and leadership?
Um, there's that's a great question. There are a couple common threads that probably tie the milestones together. One is I've always said I've had the opportunity to accept really challenging jobs. Some people would say, someone hates me at times, right? Assigning you the hardest job, but I've had the opportunity to try really hard jobs. And what that does, and what that has done for me, is it's created a little bit of an embracement of failure at times, because knowing that you're not going to be perfect at something allows you to feel accepting of the idea that it won't be perfect. So a couple of the milestones in applying that, I started in sales. They do put you through a pretty rigorous training program. In fact, I compliment the company for doing it. It was a fantastic experience and accelerated the ability to enter the market and really support customers. But I started, and what I would identify as probably the hardest role, which is trying to dig out a new logo from a company that doesn't know you or probably even want to do business with you at the time. And my first big milestone, I would say, was my first big win and success. Right? Because that is such a hard thing to do when you've never done it. Now, when you taste success, the first real test of a salesperson is how do you react? And the answer is you crave more, right? You're not busy celebrating. The next thing you want to do is go get it done again. So my first big milestone, I'd say, was just getting it done once. The other milestones are similar in thread, that they were taking on new challenges. As I mentioned on the new footprint of the new logo win experience, I was in commercial side of healthcare, nonprofit organization. I spent quite a bit of my career in that space, but in the latter part of my career, I took on a role focusing specifically on government healthcare providers, which is a completely different environment, completely different mission being served in some regards. A lot of different external factors playing into those decisions and what drives those organizations. And so from a milestone perspective, I'd say that was another big one for me, was really stepping outside kind of the core traditional healthcare market and trying to serve an entirely different sector of our industry.
So it sounds like you proved your mettle, if you will, taking on hard jobs, taking on more responsibilities, not being complacent when you got those wins, but saying, okay, what's next? Where does that come from? Is there somebody in your life that's modeled that for you, like that willingness to take on hard jobs and being okay with failure? Where's that come from?
Great question. I think my grandfather was probably the definition of somebody who always probably wanted to fail in order to learn. And I don't mean that as a negative in the sense that he just failed over and over and over again. I mean that from a point of he was never afraid of the risk, and the risk always came with an opportunity to learn something. And I was very close. My family was very close with my grandparents, and I had an opportunity to kind of watch that side by side. The other thing that we were very strong about in my family and growing up in college, and then my first employer, Cerner, reinforced, was leveraging mentorship. in just about everything you do. I had the opportunity to play collegiate sports. You had a mentor through that process. You had a mentor when you were in your program studies. You had mentors from faculty. We did it at Cerner, and I have a lot of formal and informal mentors. And what I would say is that drive to go be successful is I have a very common kind of characteristic in my mentors, and all of those people that I have had as formal or informal mentors have always shown that drive to just go do.
Wow, very cool. I did not know you played collegiate sports. What was your sport and where did you play?
I am a tennis player.
You look like a tennis player.
I don't think I look like a tennis player. And notice I did not say a good one.
Wait,
But I did play tennis.
But does
And
that
I want you
mean
on my pickleball team.
that I was about to ask, does that mean that you are now like an all-star pickleball player?
So I was one of those people who originally started out with, oh man, I can't stoop to pickleball. I mean, I'm a tennis player, right? There's some sort of prestige. And anybody that's listening to this podcast that has that mentality, I'm pro pickleball.
I'm pro pickleball.
It is way too fun to not play. And we were compared it the other day, another guy who played tennis and just think about the amount of frustration that goes in trying to pick up tennis versus everybody can pick up pickleball. Any age, any skill set. So I'm glad to hear you guys are fellow pickleballers.
We are. We are.
Awesome. One thing, and then I'll turn it over to Doug. As you progressed in your career, maybe just pick kind of the biggest challenge you faced, and be as specific as you can. What was that challenge? Whether it was like transitioning into leadership or, maybe things weren't working out the way you wanted it to, or whatever it was. What was that challenge, and how did you overcome that challenge?
Yeah. The largest challenge I think I ever faced was corporate restructuring driven. The difficulty to balance an expectation to continue to perform amongst the challenges that are faced during a situation like that. The corporate restructuring I'm referring to largely was company I worked for was acquired. Trying to fold into processes and people and even cultural changes while maintaining the expectation to deliver. And I'll caveat, the expectation to deliver wasn't on me. And I say that because I'm a firm believer in leadership. You stand on the shoulder of many giants. And my team is who really has to go deliver, right? I have the privilege and the luxury of getting to work alongside them. And the difficulty of maintaining morale, maintaining kind of that drive to keep performing, knowing that there's light at the end of certain tunnels. That's probably the most difficult thing I've ever had to manage. I'm proud to say the folks that I've worked with through that were outstanding people and continue to push forward, made me look probably better than I am in that regard. So, but that's probably the largest challenge I've ever faced.
Yeah. What were some of the things you did and by the way, I think there's probably a lot of heads nodding. I know Doug and I have both experienced that at different companies when you have leadership changes, acquisitions, goalposts are moving.
Yeah.
Or there may be, you don't even know where the goalposts are, personnel changes, culture, all that. What were some of the things you did because you're at the end of the day, you own the number. You're responsible for delivering, even if the team is out there executing. You own that. What are some of the things you did to keep the team focused and positive?
Well, my first focus is always on people, and I think that if you reinforce to people that you are still working with the same people, the people that you are working for and attempting to deliver for are the same people that you've been working for or working with for the last 2, 3, 4 years, whatever. I mean, in some situations, 20. There is that human connection of accountability that you can lean on. And honestly, that's how, in a lot of ways, that's how I got through it, right? I mean, I looked around tables and rooms and saw a lot of similar faces going through the similar challenges. And as much as for the company, I deliver to the people I work with and for. In terms of tactical things, you have to make time and you have to make environments for real conversation. Sweeping things under the rug, not addressing things head on. I think a lot of people see through that in leaders. And quite honestly, that's where I sometimes separate management and leadership.
Well, that's an important point. Talk about that some more. How do you see the difference between management and leadership?
Yeah, I actually have the quote, "A leader is someone people want to follow." It was up in my old office. It's up in my new office. You can lead from any position in an organization. Individual contributors. Some of the individual contributors I've had work for me are actually some of the best leaders I've ever worked with. Management is largely just organizing, right? And organizing teams that make sense, people who have the understanding of a business or an objective can manage a group of people marching toward that. Leaders are people that people are going to follow. And so if I managed through those difficult times, I think it becomes a little bit of a facade, right? And a little bit of a, lack of trust amongst my team. It's like, okay, we're going through the motions. It's not genuine. I put, during that experience, I put a 30-minute meeting, maybe overkill, every week on the calendar for the team so that we could just have open Q&A. No question was not off the record, pardon me. No question was out of bounds. And I told them I would answer every question that I possibly could, either by knowledge or by appropriateness.
I want to touch on a piece that you just said there, leadership versus management, and I'm gonna actually go a slightly different direction. I hear people talk about that quite a bit, and I certainly applaud the mentality that you just articulated. A leader is someone who people want to follow, and there are things you do to inspire and allow people to engage with you in that manner. But, and I'm not suggesting you were saying this, but the sense I get when I hear people talk about this is that it is almost creates a derogatory concept around management. And I wouldn't mind just talk for a moment. Those have to be in balance, right? Or would you agree? I mean, you can't just completely shun the management side, especially how you do. I actually really like your description around you manage the business, you manage the function. You can't, I just have an opinion that you've got to manage and you've got to lead. And if you over-index on one or the other, then something's going to suffer for your team or for the company.
Yeah.
I don't know. What do you think about that?
I completely agree, and I appreciate you pointing it out, because at the risk of describing leadership in a positive light, management to definitely in a negative one, right? And what's important to me is, ideally, in a perfect world, you're elevating really good leaders into management responsibilities. Managers, if you have management that is not good at leadership, you probably have a real problem, whether it's an immediate recognition or it's gonna fester over a longer period of time. It's gonna be a challenge. Management is kind of more of that official designation, and it's what runs businesses. Elevating the right leaders into a managing position takes that leadership skill set and says, okay, now you can run and be accountable for an entire objective, whatever that objective is, right? And as obviously you go higher on the food chain, you get more accountability, more things to manage.
I wonder, would you say, maybe this is a hot take for a moment, that not all leaders have to be really good at management, but you're really challenged if your managers are not embracing really strong leadership tenets.
Absolutely. I absolutely agree with that. Yeah. And I also would say, for anybody, young sales professionals that may listen to our conversation, not everybody who's good at leadership wants to be in management.
100%. Say that again. Say that
Not,
again.
yeah, not everybody who is good at leadership wants to be in management.
Or should be in management.
And yeah, agreed. And not all of them should be. There's an interesting trend, as generations get younger, with almost an assumption or an expectation that you should take on certain roles or do certain functions. When I started my career, I had some mentors in the direct sales world who lifelong individual contributors and are outstanding at their craft. And they mentored dozens, maybe, I mean, I would hate to say hundreds. I don't want to make it sound like, they were only mentoring all the time, but dozens of high performing people, would call those people mentors. They never led a team in terms of an official management function. They led teams through people wanting to follow them and actually embrace how they perform their job.
Yeah,
Yeah.
influencing others. So
Yeah.
not necessarily positional leadership or org chart leadership. It was how they influenced others.
Absolutely.
That's a powerful statement.
Were there folks that stood out to you? I mean, you don't have to name names, feel free if you want to, but just did you have people who modeled the management and leadership behaviors for you, and what were some of the things they did that stood out?
Yes, I certainly had people that managed both very, very well. I will say, in most situations, they turned great leadership into great management. They didn't go the opposite direction. They didn't become a manager first and then become a leader. In my experiences in sales organizations, people who were strong individual contributors that demonstrated that leadership capacity were elevated into management and were developed to manage people as they had performed or behaved and influenced others in their individual contributor role. I'll give a shout out. One of the people that I felt like was a fantastic leader in my career and then eventual manager was Matt Wildman. I thought Matt was a fantastic person to model after. I thought he was a fantastic person to engage with, very genuine. And then he just kept taking on more and more management responsibility, right? And never at any point do I think he changed who he was because of the job he was taking on. He continued to be the person and model down who everybody already knew he was. And there was a lot of people that gravitated toward wanting to work for a leader like that.
Awesome.
I would use a word, authentic.
Yeah.
Yeah. It feels
Great
like
word.
that. Yeah. That's an apt description. He continued to be authentic regardless of how big or small the role he was in. Grant, I'm gonna take you back for a moment. So I had also not heard this story. I love that story about you were going to go to law school. I presume law school, and then immediately after law school, president of the United States. That was the sequence that was going to happen. What could have been, who knows? But you were going to go to law school. You chose to defer. You had an advisor who gave you a recommendation. Why healthcare, and or why Cerner? And as I listen to you, as I've seen you throughout your career, you could go do anything, any number of things that you'd be successful at. But is there something unique or specific about healthcare that just continues to draw you in?
Great question. I appreciate the compliment. I don't know if I could do anything, but I like to think there's no challenge I wouldn't at least try and take on. For the question on why healthcare, of all the minors that I think I finished in my major, none of them were chemistry or biology. Never did I think I was going to med school. So I was kind of surprised at the level of interest and passion that I got when I heard about what Cerner did. I moved to Kansas City for Cerner. So, quick punch on that one is I found the Cerner booth at a college campus and looked through the material and found it really interesting and thought, oh man, they don't have health records in a computer yet. I was very,
But this is 1995. They don't have health.
and yeah, I probably should be appreciative that not everything was digitized when I graduated college, but if for some reason I thought, something so important, bank account information was digitized, I kind of just had a general thought, of course it's in the computer. I was surprised by my passion for this is something that should take the country by storm at some point. So I really got excited about getting behind something that felt like it had a different purpose. And I think a lot of people are in healthcare for that reason. You realize how important it is. I also, just like others, we all have stories of people where you're like, man, if that could have been done different, it's kind of the what if. And I didn't realize that would probably play as much of a role in my career way back then, but just a little bit of taste of it when I decided that I wanted to defer was clearly enough to keep me interested.
And it seems that excitement, that passion has continued to stay true. I mean, you're still in a healthcare technology company. You're still out there helping drive change in healthcare. If anything, would you say that passion has only grown over the years?
It has absolutely grown. Nothing is more personal. There's probably a good debate between what's more personal, healthcare or your personal finances, but let's just call them 1A and 1B for anybody, any human, right? It doesn't matter if it's an industry your profession is in or not. They are going to touch everyone. And I think just every day you talk to somebody that has some sort of healthcare experience, right? Whether their relatives going through something, their kids going through something, they're going through something. And you think about what it is you get up and do every morning and what maybe will keep you from going to bed earlier or shutting down your computer earlier and the impact it's making. I'm a little cliche in the sense that healthcare just serves a different purpose for me.
Yeah, it was, I always felt like it was a powerful statement that Cerner had, that healthcare is personal. So kudos to the creative minds that came up with that slogan for a period of time that we had at Cerner. But I felt like it embodied the passion and the why that so many people invested the time and energy that they did, is because healthcare is personal, and it is personal every single day for each one of us. James, I want to take Grant back to the sales training, and let's kind of ping pong him a little bit with some questions around his experience in that. But I guess I would ask Grant, when you mentioned that part of the reason you moved into sales is you had a client say, "Hey, I think you would be really good at that." That's a really powerful testimony. How did you get into the sales training program? And just take a moment and describe what were some of the things that y'all learned, that y'all focused on in that program as you went through it?
Yeah. The process to get into it was a fairly competitive process, very much like interviewing for a job. Even though it was
almost like trying
internal.
to interview for this podcast.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yes. That's right.
Yeah, that's
No,
right.
it was a little harder than that.
Okay.
But it was very much like a job interview. It was a select group. They had many more applicants than they had seats for it. And I went through multiple rounds of interview. You kind of did an internal application process, and somebody somewhere decided I may be good enough at it, and they let me into it. It was a rigorous program. I mean, when I went through it, I'm sure, and I know it did change after my time, but it was a very big investment for the company. I spent just shy of 6 months in dedicated training. And that dedicated training, I mean, I came, like I said, I love my experience in consulting. I had 2.5 years of consulting experience coming in, and they said, we need to really teach you about healthcare and our customers. And I kind of shrugged my shoulders and thought, I've been here 2.5 years. They must be talking to somebody else, right? They weren't. They were definitely talking to me. That training program was very specific to who the customer is in healthcare. And from a couple different lenses, obviously the patient sitting at the center, what's the experience that we create around the patient? And then those who actually used our technology, which at that time I was focusing on provider organizations very specifically. And it was eye-opening. I'm sad to say that in 2.5 years of consulting, I didn't learn everything I probably should have or could have about my clients. I thought I knew everything. That training program enlightened me quite a bit. We immersed ourselves. There was a requirement. You had to go spend time with a local health system. And that could be volunteering in, I actually got to go to KU Med and play video games with kids in the pediatric oncology unit.
Wow.
Which was
Yeah.
really fun
I didn't
until
know
you
that.
realized, until
Yeah.
you realized
Yeah.
what's going on around you. I mean, right? Everything that goes into the healthcare experience that we were touching and the processes that we were trying to automate was eye-opening when you're sitting there right there in the middle of it, watching someone get care delivery.
And did you like beat the kids in the video games and kind of celebrate, or did you let them win?
I like to say that they have way more time to practice. I had one kid that told me that he would practice for like 10 hours a week before I came just to make sure he would beat me. But no, I never celebrated. I never openly celebrated.
Oh.
But I mean, I had some unique. I did wheelchair mobilization for one of my volunteer experiences. Right. There is nothing like sitting right there smack dab in the middle of the process and watching how what you're selling or talking about is changing for somebody. In that experience, those kids were like in their living room playing video games.
Yeah.
Right. And everything happening around them, they could have been totally oblivious. And I'm very thankful for, I'm sure, of course, but totally oblivious to just all the work that goes in around them to make sure that they can have that experience. We spent a lot of time digging into understanding our clients or our customers' strategic initiatives.
Yeah.
Probably more so than I ever really thought from a transactional perspective. It's something I deployed now in my job with my teams now. We talk a lot about what are our customer strategic initiatives.
Yeah, that's an important point about healthcare is although there are transactions that occur, claims and dollars being paid and all those kinds of things, this is a very strategic industry. So it sounds like you were able to build up your skill set there to really understand the strategic needs and the business problems that those organizations had so that you can come alongside them in a more of a relationship-based approach, because these are not short sales cycles typically.
No.
Has that been your experience?
They're very long sales cycles. Yes.
Yeah. I'm going to preface this question by saying I did not go through the Cerner sales training process. I certainly had the pleasure and the honor of spending time both with people in the class. So personally, I had the chance to come speak to classes, talk about what we were doing in the population health space, et cetera. But I did not go through that training and was in a sales role per se. So I'm curious, what was your perspective of the differences or dynamic between people like yourself who went through that, who had more structured training, intentional, if you will, time spent, versus those that are not? And you may simply say, well, Doug, I watched you and you kind of sucked and I was doing really well. So that was the easiest line of demarcation that I can point to. But in all sincerity, I'm curious, did you feel a difference, see a difference in approach and mentality by and large from that experience versus those who maybe did not invest the same time and energy?
I don't want to say I saw a difference in skill set because we hired incredible people that did not come from an internal incubation concept like our training program. And I would certainly put you, Doug, in that category. But But I do think where you could sometimes tell the difference was when we had folks that hadn't been through that. They had very much a direct focus, a direct objective. They knew exactly what they were going to sell. They knew exactly how it applied to the business. They had a little bit of a just a narrower focus. When we put people from that program into some of those, even the direct focus sales roles, you could see them think about impacts differently outside of their solution or services set. You just saw them think, okay, I'm going to take my step back to
Right.
what's the enterprise strategic initiative. And you could kind of see them work differently at times. Truthfully, I don't know that there's necessarily a different execution component. It's just more of a training of a way to think about your customer as a whole that I think was developed in that program.
Yeah.
Yeah, I look at it. I'm thinking of kind of the, and obviously nowhere near the seriousness, but like a Navy SEAL program versus a basic training. Obviously, they're all difficult. And I'm wondering, for our listeners who may be leading organizations or aspiring to grow and lead organizations, what are those things that you observed that helped equip you, or the things that you were given in the program, right? And it sounds like some mentoring for sure. There's structure, infrastructure, mentoring, training, shadowing, understanding the voice of the customer and the business problems of the customer. Those are all things that any company, any leader could do or create for their team, if you will, or even themselves. And they don't need to be a multi-million or billion-dollar company to set up that environment. Would you agree with that? And how do you what else do you see that those programs did or could do that you would recommend to our listeners?
Yeah, I talked a little bit about being a fan of audiobooks, reading, podcasts. It kind of all funnels back to lifelong learner, right? Being able to accept the idea that I don't know everything and there's an opportunity to learn something every single day. If I tie that back into that training program, Doug, and to kind of further elaborate on what you and I were just talking about, we didn't know the job we would be given at the end of this. And when you hire somebody into a direct sales role, it's, let's just say it's for patient accounting. They have a fairly good idea of where they need to focus their time, energy, learning. When you go through a program and you have no idea what you're going to talk about at the end of that 6 months with customers, it forces you to broaden your perspective. You have to try and take a strong interest in everything. Now, where I would give some where I would give some advice to folks who might be listening, if you're hired into a direct sales responsibility, know exactly what you're going to be selling. That doesn't mean it limits your ability to keep the boundaries expanded. Take every opportunity you can to learn what's on the peripheral of what you're selling. Take every opportunity to learn what's a downstream impact of what you're selling. That is, to me, probably one of the biggest opportunities people don't take advantage of, is to take a self-driven approach to expanding their knowledge base and experience.
I think that is a really, really important observation. And I want to explore that just a little bit more. And I'm going to make a catch-all conversation and our observation. And this is stereotypical, which really means it's not accurate for most people, but people have a perception that it's accurate for a lot of people, which is that the general perception for a salesperson is that it is personality driven. It's more charisma than methodology. And I think especially people earlier in their career probably have a inclination or a thought process that I don't necessarily need to learn something. I may need to learn about the product. I may need to learn about the company, but I don't need to learn something. I just need to talk to people. I need to sell them something. And what I'm hearing from you, Grant, and yeah, I'd be curious to hear you expound a little bit on this, is
That's really not the case. A good salesperson is one that is constantly learning. She or he is challenging themselves, not just to learn about the industry, but to learn about the process. And that sales, yeah, you can define it as an art, but it's really a methodology. It's a practice that you refine and refine time and time again. Does that ring true to you in terms of what you've seen throughout your career?
I think so. Where I will say there's been some evolution
Hmm.
is when I started in sales, everybody talked about, well, every sale is relationship driven, right? Every sale is what people buy from people they like. And I still think there's truth to that. You know, you could
Yeah.
talk about data suggesting a shift in, you know, more fact-based buying decisions. I still think everyone is human and everyone gravitates toward making a decision that gives them a level of satisfaction and confidence. And some of that's the person they're buying it from. Um, but I think there has become more of a methodology into why people buy, how people sell, in my tenure of sales. The focus there, though, that remains consistent from my perspective, and what I would hope everybody that I ever worked with or for or worked for me would practice is really your methodology is about embracing learning from your customer.
Mm-hmm.
If you are listening to your customer, you are building trust, credibility, and that level of confidence that eventually winds up with them wanting to do business with you and the company you represent. So I do think there is the methodology can be trained. You can train what maybe people would say would not be overly charismatic individuals into being high performing salespeople. I don't think, regardless of charisma, if they are not willing to listen and learn, that anybody's going to buy from them.
Yeah, I think that is a really powerful statement. Thank you for
Totally agree.
that. Yeah.
Very, very helpful. I want to drill in and be a little more tactical for a
Yeah.
moment for our listeners. Is there a personal habit or practice that you have that you think has contributed to your success? So something you do on either maybe a daily basis, weekly basis, how you approach managing your time, how I definitely hear like the lifelong learning is for sure an attitude,
Yeah.
right? And I've said, hey, discovery is an attitude, not an event. So, is there something specific that you do on like a daily, weekly, monthly basis that helps you lead more successfully?
Great question. I probably do a couple things in terms of how it contributes to my ability to lead. Number one, I try and create time with my team to be more personal and less transactional and allow them to drive the engagement. So when you find time with me for 30 minutes, we don't sit and drill down into every deal you're working on and did you do this and did you do that? A lot of that does come out and we talk, but I make the time personal for them to be able to spend time talking about what they want. One of the things that I did experience at one point in my career was every time I would talk to a manager, it would be very inquisitive on what are you doing. And I didn't feel like that was the one time in my career where I felt like I was limited on development investment from leadership. I've learned from that. I don't want to do that. So I make sure that that's a practice, is to make it more personal and allow that engagement with my team to be driven by them. From another tactical perspective on a personal front, because I still engage with clients on a daily basis, even as a direct client relationship owner in my role with some clients, I try to make sure I have a touch point with clients on a personal level that is not tied to the professional side of our relationship with some level of frequency. It can be checking in on baseball games. How's your kids' baseball games going? It can be checking in on how a vacation went. I had somebody the other day, it's on my list of things to do early next week, is I had somebody share that their mom was struggling through breast cancer. and they were talking to me while they were in the clinic waiting for their mom to get an update, but they really wanted to talk to me. And I mean, it's just as simple as making that relationship personal. I make sure to make some time to do that and make sure that not all of my touch points are about doing business with me. Probably the last thing I would say is if I owe somebody something, I usually will not turn down my computer until I get it out. If I said I will get it to you by the end of the day, I work really hard to get it to you by the end of the day. Work-life balance is a challenge. It's a challenge everybody has. I encourage everyone to remember the life part of that. I've got young kids at this stage. I try and block off that window post school to bedtime as much as I can. But I'll open up the computer and make sure somebody has something in their inbox the next morning if they were depending on me. I certainly don't ever want to be the reason somebody is waiting for something. So I tend to make sure I have an approach of if you need something from me and you're counting on me, I do not want to let you down. And I won't close that laptop until it gets done. Makes for some late nights sometimes, but that's my discipline.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing those. I want to go back to earlier in our conversation about, how you ended up in healthcare and the why. And there's no doubt in my mind that you've got the why for healthcare and you're passionate about it. And especially now in your career after you've seen the power of technology and how it can impact healthcare and the personal side of family and healthcare stories. How do you, as a growth leader, strike that balance or maybe a lack of balance with the mission and margin? So the why is super important in healthcare. There's no doubt like what we're getting up and doing is impacting human lives. How do you handle those growth expectations when, we're in a market where there have been some fairly unrealistic growth expectations for healthcare IT, and I'm not singling out any specific companies, but just in general, been a lot of private equity investment, a lot of turnover of leadership teams. How do you strike that balance and set those expectations accordingly with your leadership, your board, and your team?
Yeah. Well, I will start by saying I am privileged. We're a founder-led organization that's definitely committed and recommitted and reemphasized. We do this for a reason that is mission first, margin second. There are times in the evolution of a company when that becomes incredibly difficult and in some cases almost impossible to maintain, and I will recognize that. Once you have investment from those who have expectation of delivery on a different level and different measurements, it becomes a real challenge in healthcare. And I think we're seeing some of that, especially right now. We all have to remember 70+% of hospitals don't actually make money, right? I mean, healthcare is a humanistic driven segment. It is not a double-digit profit margin sector. And I try and remind myself all the time when I sit in front of my clients, when they're talking about problems they're solving, I mean, you just put it as simple as they're trying to save lives and they're not going to get paid for it, right? They're going to spend more money in a lot of situations to save a life than they're going to spend more money. They're going to spend more money trying to save a life than they're going to get appreciation in return outside of a really big hug, right? From somebody at some point. And that's difficult because, you sit in front of executives and the challenge that they have in their business to put mission over margin is something you kind of have to embrace as a leader, is to remember who you're serving. Back to the challenge of my business or our business and healthcare IT when you're serving that is I also spend time reminding our clients or customers, I spend time reminding them about the value and impact of technology and what it can provide if deployed really well and leveraged really well in terms of bending the curve. I am a firm believer, and I know you'll probably hear a lot of people say this, but I'm a firm believer that if it does not have an ROI, in this environment, and you can define ROI different ways. You can say it can be revenue generation. You can say it can be quality initiative centric. It can be, workforce spending controls, whatever it is. If it doesn't have a benefit, I can't imagine healthcare organizations being able to invest in technologies like that at the moment.
Yeah, it's never going to make it past the CFO's desk.
Yeah.
Right. So, you bring up an interesting dilemma. If the majority of the buyers, and at least talking through the acute care space, and it's not much better on the post-acute side,
Sure.
where I've been more recently, and behavioral health, and really, I don't know many areas of healthcare, unless you're a payer, where there's double digit or high growth rates. And in many cases, they're operating in the red. How, is it realistic for our companies that we lead and influence to have high growth expectations? And then, so how do you set that expectation without, look, we're all up for the challenge. You talked earlier about, I want the hard job. Like, I want to go after what's hard. I don't want to lay up. I don't want easy stuff. How do you balance that? How do you set those expectations?
Well, and I'm gonna tag something on to James's question so that you get a double whammy as you answer this. How do you see your role in setting that expectation? What do you see? You've got the title now, Chief Revenue Officer. How do you think about the responsibility, or do you have a responsibility in this role to frame or set an expectation around what is possible from a growth perspective?
I'm going to work these in reverse order. So I absolutely think I have a responsibility. And any organization, obviously the board is the ultimate say, and they look to a CEO, or depending on the structure of an organization, a president or a general manager or whatever, to say, hey, this is you, and everything underneath it is you. In most organizations, if you have a chief revenue officer, it is an admission that you need to surround yourself with talent that knows a space better than you probably do as a president or a CEO. And so they're looking for you to be that accountable party, that voice. And if you're working in partnership as a part of a leadership team and a highly effective leadership team, I want that accountability. I don't want my CEO to feel that accountability by themselves. And I do think it is my responsibility to say what is possible and what is not possible. It's not always popular. Right. And especially in this day and age, it's become even less popular, right? There are so many factors that are playing a role in healthcare IT, one of which we've talked about just now, which is the significant investments in venture capital or private equity. And those missions are to drive values on businesses, and values are driven off of sales, right? And it does not always align, and being able to call a spade at that time is important. The other thing I would say, to go back to a little bit of James's part of this question, is when we're talking about performing, we really need to set expectations. And it's important that expectations are not just dollar signs.
Interesting. Okay.
Dollar signs are an end game product of a lot of factors. There are timelines, there are decision processes and criteria. I'll give you a good one just that I think about, and I remind my team all the time. What it takes to get a deal done at, I'll just generally pick random organizations, Children's Hospital in Minnesota, versus what it takes to get something done at an organization that's state operated under an education arm. Wildly different. they're the providers, and you start saying, hey, I talked to Dr. So-and-so at Children's Minnesota, or I talked to Dr. So-and-so at state-run institution, and they're saying the exact same things. They have the exact same goals. They have the exact same objectives. That does not mean they equal the same deal. That doesn't mean that your business should count on the same process. That's oftentimes difficult for external participants in your business to understand that, right? They want to be able to hear that you can work through a deal cycle in 6 months, and all deal cycles take these 7 steps, and we're going to be off to the races. I have yet to experience that in healthcare IT. I will be honest. If there was a playbook, I'd be real surprised on a lot, at least a playbook that people can count on with a high level of consistency. I'd be very surprised. And I certainly would love to learn. That's my learning element. I'd love to learn from that person or that playbook.
Sounds like our next
Yeah.
podcast episode.
I agree.
Yeah.
The playbook.
Yeah,
The playbook.
How to make every
Yeah.
sales cycle 6 months or less.
Well, I want to touch on that, and then I want to pivot to a different question. As I listen to CROs, sales-oriented podcasts that are in other industries, there is a lot of talk about this playbook mentality, and it feels like there's this overarching belief that you can get to this very methodical, it's going to happen, these are the 5 steps, etc. And I do think that there's a lot of value, if you will, to being methodical about your approach and structured, et cetera, et cetera. But I also hear and believe what you just said, that if you don't have an appreciation for the specific nuances of your industry, and within healthcare, those nuances are complicated and challenging to navigate, then you're setting yourselves up for a misunderstanding or a missed expectation, which kind of goes back to what you're saying. It's important to set appropriate expectations. So we've covered a lot of ground, Grant. Super appreciated. First of all, if you could take a moment, pick up a phone, do a video, send to yourself that was just starting at Cerner, other than don't call it Kerner, what would you tell yourself based on the life experiences you've gathered over the last X amount of years?
I'll take it away from my specific experience and give it to a generic audience that's getting into healthcare IT. Is really invest. I had the luxury of a company that was willing to invest time in me. That's not always the case. If I brought on a brand new associate today, I would be challenged to have that person receive that level of investment as a small company, and I kind of need them to hit the ground running a little sooner. So to the generic audience, make time and find ways on the personal front to invest in your understanding of your customers, whether you're serving payers, whether you're serving providers, whether you're doing things on the patient experience side. Really spend some time focusing on that. And I know it's easy to say, so I'm going to give you a little more tactical commentary to it. Understand how physicians make money. Understand what a physician's day looks like in the morning. And I mean all the way to when they get out of bed. Now, don't go shadow them at their house. But understand, they're on, I've got colleagues and friends that are physicians, and some of them are up at 5 a.m. cleaning up documentation before their kids get out of bed. And then they're handling the duties at home with children. And then they're in the office for cases or clinic visits until 8 or 9 o'clock. Understand truly the process that goes into who you're talking to's day and all the different things that influence what's important to them. I think that will make you a better salesperson. And eventually, if you have interest in leading sales teams and growing your management experience, it'll give you a better foundation to help your associates understand how much energy and understanding you put into your customers.
That's great advice.
Good stuff.
Yeah.
That's a good word, Grant Johnson. So pumped you've been here. I've got the hardest, most controversial question for you to close us out.
All right, you got it.
Are you ready? Favorite barbecue spot? Go.
Slaps.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
No hesitation, folks. There you go.
Yep.
We'll put up the address and a picture of the menu.
Slaps
Yeah, there you
Barbecue.
go.
Awesome.
Fantastic.
Yep.
Grant, thank you so much.
It's been a
Hey
real
guys,
pleasure.
it was great to see you. Thanks for having me on. I look forward to some opportunity to talk with you guys again, and good luck with the podcast. I will be listening.
Yeah, that's
Fantastic.
awesome.
Thank you for listening. We are excited to bring new episodes out each week. We are incredibly grateful to our guests and our listeners. Let us know what you think by commenting on the episodes. We are proudly sponsored by the Upper Right Corner, which provides advice on strategic growth, including growth assessments and strategy, go-to-network planning, sales leadership and team coaching, and fractional leadership roles. For more, visit theupperrightcorner.com. Waypoint Healthcare Solutions is also proud to sponsor the Counterweight podcast. Waypoint HCS is a focused consulting organization helping health systems, providers, and organizations to develop and implement patient engagement strategies. Waypoint HCS provides strategic consulting and patient engagement technology guidance and selection. Waypoint also helps support implementation and ongoing program management. For more, visit Waypoint HCS's LinkedIn page or waypointhcs.com. Thank you to our guests and our listeners. As always, you can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Subscribe, like, and follow, and we look forward to joining you again next Wednesday for another episode of The Counterweight.